Okay.
Your shoulders in the picture.
Okay, thank you for coming. Okay, we're going to discuss today as the title suggests, the development of Muktzeh. As we know, Muktzeh is a rabbinic decree. It's the Rabbanan. So seemingly, we would think that as many of the takanas of Chazal, it wasn't always around. And it'll be interesting if we can think about it for a minute, that the way we experience Shabbos today, if we wouldn't have Muktzeh in practice, seemingly Shabbos would have a very different look. So as we'll see, we'll go through the Gemaras and some of the...
If we did have Muktzeh in practice,
Shabbos would look very different.
Oh.
So we're going to try to figure out how this came to be, the takana of Muktzeh, and how it developed, and try to picture in the view of the Paiskim how it came to the way we have it today. So first of all, just to define the term, the word Muktzeh, for dictionary purposes, Muktzeh just means something which is set apart. If an item is not integral to Kiyam HaShabbos, if it's not integral to something that we need for Shabbos, so Chazal use this word Muktzeh to tell us that it's set apart for Shabbos use. It's not something we should be using on Shabbos. The opposite, the antonym of the word Muktzeh is Muchan, something which is prepared, something which is doesn't mean that we have to actually actively prepare it for Shabbos, but the point is that it's something which is suitable and available for Shabbos use. As many of us are all familiar with, there are basically four main categories of items, how we define them in Muktzeh terms. The first category is called Muktzeh Machas Chusar and Kiss, something which is set aside because of its inherent monetary value. It's something which is very delicate, so we wouldn't just handle it loosely. The Gemara gives the example of a saket shel shchita, a shchita knife or a meal knife, something which is very delicate, and even the slightest imperfection could mess it up. So people, are very careful where they put it. That's one category of Muktzeh. There's another category of Muktzeh called Muktzeh Machmas Gufo, something which it's not a kli even of itself. It's like a stick or a stone, something which is not a vessel. So that's another category of Muktzeh. The third category of Muktzeh, something which we're most familiar with, is kli shamachto le'isser, something which is typically used for a isser purpose. A common example of this would be a hammer, which is used for building, but it could also at times function for a permissible function. The last category of Muktzeh is something which we call basis. A basis is something which is technically mutter, let's say a tissue box, but going into Shabbos there was something usher riding on it, something usher sitting on it. It had a rock on top of this tissue box, that became the base, that became the holder for the Muktzeh item going into Shabbos. So there we have a halacha that becomes the status of whatever was on top of it, and it is now also classified and considered Muktzeh for the continuation of Shabbos. So just to keep this in mind, and as we go along we'll see if perhaps maybe not all of these categories were always enforced, and maybe they developed over time as well. One question I also want to bring up, and I think we could keep in the back of our minds as we're going through the Mar Makomos here, is that we often use the word Muktzeh as a very general word for transgression of Shabbos. In our common vernacular, like for example, when it comes to food which is not kosher, we often call it treif. Treif, in really in halachic terms, really has a very specific definition. A treif is an animal that was technically torn apart, was not shechted in an appropriate fashion, it was torn apart, but in our common vernacular, we use the word treifa as a word which is anything which is not kosher. That food, it's treif. So, okay, that's interesting why that became. But we're discussing today the halachas of Muktzeh. I'd like to try to figure out, if we can, why perhaps the word Muktzeh became the word that we use in our common vernacular for why someone is being Mechal Shabbos. Oh, he's a Muktzeh guy. He's someone who's doing something Muktzeh. There's 39 malachas, there are 39 prohibitions of Shabbos which are for sure da'araisa, that we don't usually use those. Oh, that guy's, he's a plower. He's plowing on Shabbos. So that guy, he's a builder. Right? Usually we just use the word Muktzeh in a colloquial sense. So we'll try to figure out, if we can, perhaps why that came to be. So the first source I like to start with is the Gemara on Shabbos. It's source number 1 on the sheets. It's on Parak Kol HaKelim, the 17th parak of Shabbos. And I'll just paraphrase part of the Gemara. The Gemara there is discussing, the Mishnah there, it's coming off discussing various Kelim which are Muktzeh on Shabbos. And the Gemara says, B'toner Rabbanan, where the Gemara starts off, where it's marked off, Barishona, in the beginning, Hayu Omrim, they used to say, and we'll see who they were soon, that only Shlosha Kelim Nital b'Shabbos, only 3 categories of Kelim could be taken on Shabbos, and the Gemara lists of 3 interesting things that for some reason they felt were necessary to use on Shabbos. Number 1, Muktzeh shel devela, a certain type of sharp cutting utensil that was used to cut the honeycombs. The Zuama, Listerin shel kedera, and some type of the way I understand it, something like a slated spoon that was able to take out some of the fats or some of the stuff that came to the soup or some pot after it was cooked. And the third thing the Gemara says is sakin kitana shal gabe shulchan, a small knife that was on top of the table. So these three kelim, Chazal felt that if we can't answer them, but everything else we can answer on Shabbos. So anything else will not be allowed to be used on Shabbos in any way, shape, or form except these three vessels. Just to point out that Tosfos and Rishonim do learn that, of course, this does not include any utensils that we need for eating. Spoons, forks, knives, cups, plates, that's not even in the discussion. Or svarim, or kisvei HaKodesh, or eichlim, those things were never even in discussion. We're discussing other kelim, which maybe fall into the categories like we spoke about before of Muktzeh Machzor and Kiss, or Klish Machtel Isser, or even Kelim that Shemalachtim Laheter, but not necessarily that we need to use it on Shabbos. So everything is assumed Aser, unless it falls into one of these specific categories of either utensils that we need specifically for eating, or these utensils which are used for particular purposes. Then the Gemara says some very interesting words. It's a couple lines down. Hetiru, they allowed them. V'chazru hetiru, and they allowed them more. And then v'chazru v'hetiru, they allowed them even more. Another stage of heter. Ad sha'amru, until the statement was changed, until now we say kol ha'kelim nitom. Shabbos, everything could be used on Shabbos. Now all kelim are assumed permissible. Chutz min meser hagadol v'yeset shamachresh, except these two type of tools that are used in farming utensils, some type of plowing tools and other types of ideas what to work the ground with, a shoveling and a spade, something like that. So all these things that these are for sure no Shabbos use, those are going to be Muktzeh. And the Gemara continues, we're not going to get involved in this minute. There's Machlekes and Bayim Rava. What exactly happened over here? Let me just speak it out a little bit. So basically what the Gemara is telling us is that there was at one point there was a takana, everything is usher besides three kelim. Then they Chazal pulled back a little bit on takana, then they pulled back a little more, until they pulled back a little more, until they decided that we can now allow Klal Yisrael to use many more kelim than they had in the past. So the Gemara at the end, after it gets involved in Machlekes and Bayim Rava, exactly how it worked, the Gemara says, Amrab, where it's underlined, Amrab Chanina, when did this happen? When did this whole takana that we're discussing take place? The Gemara says, B'mei Nechemya ben Chakalia, Nishnas Mishnah Zu, this halacha, this brisa was taught and said over in the days of Nechemya. The Ksiv, like the Pasuk in Nechemya says, by Yamim, Hahema, in those days, where Isi Yehuda, Nechemya says, I saw in Yehuda and Eretz Yisrael, Darchim Gitais B'Shabbos, they were using the wine presses on Shabbos, Reviyam Aremes, they were bringing loads on the donkeys on Shabbos, and we'll see shortly in the next source, the Psukim in Nechemya, at the end of Nechemya, the Nechemya there is really discussing some very tragic events that he was witness to during Galus Bavel, between the destruction of the first and second base of Migdash, particularly here, as the Klal Yisrael was coming back to Eretz Yisrael from being in Bavel, there were much of Klal Yisrael was really on a very low level of Kiyum Mitzvahs, unfortunately, and he writes there, this is in the end of Nechemya and Perek Yud Gimel, how he was a witness to rampant Chil Shabbos. The marketplace was open in Yerushalayim on Shabbos, Rachmana litzlan. They were bringing in fresh merchandise to sell on Shabbos, and they really needed to do something quick. The Nechemya, together with Chag Zechariah Malachi, they really had to do something quick to stop this in order so it shouldn't continue to spiral out of control. So the Psukim there say that, I'm just speaking it out, it's really just telling you, I'm just speaking out the Psukim over here. The Psukim here say that really what he did was, he warned them, and they didn't want to listen, so he shut the gates of Yerushalayim, and they camped first. After they were shut out of Yerushalayim on Shabbos. So basically, he closed off the city on Shabbos, so they couldn't get in. All the merchants that wanted to sell their wares, and then he saw that they were just. The pasuk Chaf says, "Vayolinu harochlim." They camped outside, so they opened up their market outside. The market day was unfortunately on Shabbos still, but outside the gates of Yerushalayim. Until he warned them again. And pasuk Chafal says, "If you don't come near here, if you continue to come here, I'm going to have to I have to send out soldiers against you." So he threatened them with some type of force, and then they stopped coming. And the pasuk there concludes in Chav Beis that he appointed the Levim to be the guards for Shabbos, and this Chil Shabbos stopped. So the Gemara is basically telling us that even though the Psukim here are not clear that there was a specific takana, but the Gemara is telling us from these Psukim what Nechemya here decreed the halachas of Muktzeh. Again, they were having rampant Chil Shabbos. The marketplace was open on Shabbos. They were selling all their fresh merchandise, and Nechemya realized he had to put a stop to it, so he decreed Muktzeh. The Psukim, you don't see that clearly in the Psukim. All you see clearly in the Psukim is that he put them out of business and threaten them. But the Gemara again is telling us that from here we see that Muktzeh came into force.
At that point, what Chol Shabbos is there?
Very good. So from the Psukim, all we see is that they were pressing the grapes. So seemingly they were producing fresh wine on Shabbos, it sounds like. Or even if you can argue, it just means they were bringing the fresh wine, but they were definitely doing business transactions, which is seemingly only D'Rabbanan, Mekach or Memkar. Perhaps you could say that they were carrying things because they were doing Hotzah from Rishus to Rishus. They were transporting the merchandise from one domain to another domain. Perhaps they were, it doesn't say they were cutting the wheat or anything, so it's hard to know exactly, pinpoint exactly the prohibitions, but it sounds like just the fact that the marketplace is open on Shabbos, so they were being exposed to Chil Shabbos from A to Z. But Nehemiah for some reason felt, where the Gemara is telling us that if he decrees Muktzeh, then it'll shut down the business. And it worked, Baruch Hashem. He made this takana, and after a short time, it seems like, from the Psukim, it seems like...
Where do you see it says Muktzeh?
The Psukim never says the word Muktzeh. The Gemara is telling us... that...
It says here...
Right. There was Chil Shabbos.
Right, and then he tried to stop it.
And he stopped it, that's what the Psukim say. And the Gemara is telling us that the way it was accomplished is by decreeing in Muktzeh. Because since he saw that there was Chil Shabbos, Rashi said on the Gemara... Rashi said on the last skinny lines of Rashi, right, when it gets wide, it says, "Kaman amrinan, to Yemei Nechemi ben Chakalia b'Bai Sheni gozru al tiltu kol hakelim kedei ligdar geder, in order to make a fence lahachamir be'isurei Shabbos and neishoyim hakilim bo." Because since people were being lax in Shabbos observance, so he had to do something, and he felt that making this takana of Muktzeh would set them straight, and they would stop doing Chil Shabbos. Now again, the Psukim never use the word Muktzeh over here in this context. And without the Gemara, you would just think there was Chil Shabbos. He had a fight with them, so to speak, and he won. The Bezdin showed it.
Because this isn't Muktzeh, this is really just plain Chil Shabbos.
Right. We're going to stress that more in a moment. But really, all you're seeing in the Psukim, in the simple reading of the Psukim, all you're seeing is Chil Shabbos in a general sense, carrying, doing business, etc. And the Gemara is telling us that by decreeing Muktzeh, he was able to put a stop to all this. Because by decreeing Muktzeh, what did he do? He said you can't move all these kelim around. You can't start carrying your merchandise. You can't start dealing with the animals, right? It's really going to halt all business if he's decreeing Muktzeh, because now they can't move everything around.
When were the D'Rabbanans of Mekach and Memkar generally? When does that date back to? Or do we
Okay, that's a good question. See, we have the Psukim in Yirmiyah, right? So, did it happen then or happen a little before then? I think as we go along, we'll see. We might be able to answer that question as well. But I can't answer that for sure, because at least from this Gemara, we don't see that clearly. But what seems to be, again, at face value from this Gemara, we seem to see from the base of the Psukim and Nehemiah, the Gemara is telling us that Muktzeh started now. So if you want to go to a specific date in history, a little bit before the building of the second Beis Hamikdash, basically towards the end of Galus Bavel, it seems like from this Gemara is when the Gezerah of Muktzeh started. That's how...
Why would they care about Muktzeh if they didn't care about Chil Shabbos?
Why would that stop it? They want to just tell me, you be Mechal Shabbos, I'm going to kill all you. Good question. Meaning, right, the Yochai Misa, right? Let's get Eidim out. Let's make it more severe. Good question. I'm not sure if we're going to answer that directly, but perhaps.
But it worked.
Right, it worked. The Maisa, it worked. And again, I want to emphasize that from the Psukim, you don't see it. You only see that from the Gemara. Now,
who was the first to use the term Muktzeh in this situation?
The what? That they were being lax. Right. Right. It's giving the whole general sense of Shabbos.
So who was the first to use the term Muktzeh?
Muktzeh, I'm not familiar at this point. I haven't done a Google search to see if it's anywhere in some pasuk in Navi. I'm not familiar at this moment. At least let's see. I think it's a term from the Gemara, but I can't say that for sure.
Google search?
I gotta somehow search and it's all Tanakh. Okay. But it's interesting that what Taisus and Baba Kaba in source number 3 tells us is that although the Gemara seems to tell us that there was various stages to this takana, and we don't see from the Gemara itself exactly, first they answered everything, then they pulled back, but Taisus makes it very clear to us that this all took place in the days of Nehemiah. It doesn't tell us over how long of a span. Was it a month span? Was it a year span? This we don't see from Taisus, but Taisus says this whole takana that they stopped everything. They said you can't move any kelim on Shabbos, and then they pulled back on that takana a little bit, and they continued to pull back until we have Muktzeh as we have it today. Taisa says all happened in the times of Nehemiah. It wasn't that, for 50 years, so to speak, nobody moved anything, and then for the next 50 years they moved half of the Keilah, and then 50 years later it wasn't like that. It seems like in a relatively, for history's sake, a short period of time, they made this takana to the extreme, where everything became usher, and then slowly, within that short history period of Nehemiah, they pulled back until Muktzeh became developed as we have it today. So again, from the first Gemara and from Psukim and Nehemiah, we see very clearly that Nehemiah was the one who was Misakin Muktzeh. It was an answer to a specific problem of rampant Chil Shabbos. It worked. It stopped the Chil Shabbos, and since it stopped the Chil Shabbos, he was able to be a little bit more lax in the severity of the takana that originally instituted. But nonetheless, it's left as the Gezer of Muktzeh, like we have it today. That we have the various categories, like we started off with, of a Klisha Machtel Isser or Muktzeh Machtel Sar and Kiss, etc. Now, there's going to be a couple of issues with this understanding, although it's seemingly the Gemara is telling us, like we said, Nehemiah invented Muktzeh. But if we go to an earlier Gemara in Shabbos, the Gemara which is source number 4, I'll just speak out some of that Gemara. The Gemara there has an interesting discussion of the death of David HaMelech. As we know, David HaMelech lived 70 years. And he was nifter, and it came close to his time to go, so he asked, the Pasuk in Tehillim says, Haydi'eni Hashem Kitzi. David HaMelech asked HaKadosh Baruch Hu, please let me know when my days will end. Umidas Yomai Mahi, to know exactly when I'm going to die. HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, I can't tell you exactly. Anyway, eventually gets out he's going to die on Shabbos. So David HaMelech, as you know, tries to beat the system, and he knows that if he's going to keep learning the whole day, Malach HaMavis won't be able to get him. So he's focused on his learning, and the Malach HaMavis does a shtick with him, makes a whole noise in the background, a tree falls down, he goes to see what happens, and at that point the Malach HaMavis is able to get him, and David HaMelech is nifter. So the Gemara says, which is towards the end of the Gemara where I've underlined it, so now David HaMelech, let's just say we'll call it, so to speak, he had a heart attack, so to speak, and now unfortunately he's there lying on the floor in the palace on Shabbos. So Shalach Shlomo Lebei Midrasha, Shlomo Melech sends, Shlomo was about to be the Melech, right? His father just died, right? He's about to be the Melech. Shlomo, his son, sends to the Beit Midrash, sends to the Chachamim, Abba Meis, my father died, Umuta Abachama, and he's in the sun, meaning he's going to be decaying. He's a Bizayin HaMeis. Going on, with Kalav Mishabeis Abba Revim, and the dogs in the palace are hungry, so I'm afraid that my father's body is going to come to some type of Bizayin. Ma'esa, what should I do with my father's body on Shabbos? Shal so they tell him, the Chachamim tell Shlomo, cut up some meat for the dogs, and give it to the dogs. So get the dogs out of the way. So give the dog their dog food and get them out of the way. Don't worry about that. The next thing, what should you do with your father? Hanach alav kikar tinuk, place by him a piece of bread, a loaf of bread, or a young child. V'tiltaloi, and then move him. Meaning, this is the halacha. I don't want to spend too much time on it right now, but the halacha is that a mace is muktzah on Shabbos. A person, once he's died, the dead body is muktzah on Shabbos. It's muktzah machmas gufo, because that point, unfortunately, doesn't serve any purpose, and you can't move him. So the way to move a dead body on Shabbos is with something else. It's a specific permissibility most places can learn only for a mace, and so you could put something non-muktzah next to him on the same bench that he's on, or if he's on the floor, so you put it on top of him, and then you can move both things together. So the Chacham here are telling Shlomo, put a piece of bread or put a tinok by your father and move it together. And then the Gemara concludes, Amar Shlomo, the pasuk in Kehelas, which says, Ki lekelev chayhu tov min ari hameis. A live dog is better than a dead lion. That's what this pasuk is referring to, this story of Shlomo. Okay, but what do we see from this Gemara? Although it's a fascinating story, what we see from this Gemara is that David HaMelech, when he was nifter, was muktzah. David HaMelech was approximately 400 and change years before Nehemiah. We just said, the Gemara just told us before that until the days of Nehemiah, muktzah was not invented. So if muktzah wasn't invented, who invented that David HaMelech was muktzah? Again, David HaMelech is dead on Shabbos. The only way to move him now, we're saying, is to put a kikar or tinuk on him, so a non-muktzah item, and move the dead body together with the food or with the young child. But why is David HaMelech muktzah? Who invented it yet? They're 400 years plus ahead of themselves. Right?
Maybe he's only Kalim.
Oh, okay. Hold on, we'll get there in a second. So, in source 6 on the next page, that's from the Shulchan Aruch Harav, the Baal Tanya, where over there he's discussing the idea of muktzah in general, and he says there a couple lines down, Avol Davar, the last couple, it's the 1, 2, 3, it's 4 lines down, the last 2 words on the line says, Avol Davar she'enoi ra'oi b'Shabbos. something which is completely unsuitable for Shabbos use, haya asal talto is forbidden to move it af b'mei David b'Shlomo, even in the days of David and Shlomo, or even maybe perhaps before that. Masha'en kein kalim, as opposed to something which is a vessel. So basically just saying what Rav Neil just told us, that we're going to have to now make a distinction between different categories of muktzeh. We're using again the word muktzeh in a general sense to include everything, all the categories we said before. But the Shulchan Aruch Rav is telling us, based on this Gemara, L'chora, and maybe other sources as well, that we can't say muktzeh was only invented by Nehemiah. We see right in the days of David HaMelech that muktzeh existed, but perhaps he says we can make a distinction. Something which is completely unsuitable, like a dead body, or put in the same category, because in halacha it's in the same category, a stone, wood, things like that, which are not yet kalim. Of course, if you fashion wood into a keli, it gets the status of a vessel, but raw wood, so to speak. So these things always existed even earlier. It doesn't say when, but he says at least we can source it back to David and Shlomo. That's muktzah machmas gufo. But kalim, the various vessels that we come in contact with on a regular basis, that was only in the days of Nehemiah. So now we've expanded, going back a little bit more in time when Muktzeh started. Muktzeh to some level existed already before Nehemiah. It existed again, at least in the days of David, and perhaps even earlier, because we have no specific source yet to say exactly David HaMelech didn't invent it. Seemingly, Shlomo HaMelech didn't invent it. Shlomo HaMelech, at that time, keep in mind, was 12 years old when he became a king. So, he didn't invent it at that second. It was already in place from beforehand. We don't have a specific source at this point to know that someone else particularly invented it. So it seems like it was already self-understood that was in place. Again, even though there's no source in the pasuk for it per se, but now we have broken up the category of muktzah into two basic categories. Muktzah machmas gufo, things which are not kalim at all, were always aser, and things which are kalim, vessels, that only came into practice later on in the days of Nehemiah. Okay, now, what we spoke about a little bit before, we were trying to work out what was the Hilchos Shabbos that was going on in the days of Nehemiah. So we said, and we pointed out that the Psukim never said exactly what was going on. They were doing business, they were bringing the fresh produce, the wine, and Nehemiah made this all-encompassing gezerah of Muktzeh. The Rambam in the Hilchos Shabbos and Parachav Dalet offers three reasons why Muktzeh came to be, and we'll try to figure out if we can plug this back in to the general concept that we have so far of Nehemiah instituting Muktzeh. The Rambam says in Halacha Yud Beis, Halacha Yud Gimel, the reason why Chazal Asur Muktzeh, in the second line there he says, why did Chazal institute this takana? Number one, he says, Amru Chazal said, Uma'im his hiru neviim. Just like we have the psukim in Yirmiyah, like we said before, we have to walk differently on Shabbos, and we have to talk differently on Shabbos. We can't talk business matters, etc. So we can't be busy moving around everything on Shabbos like we're moving around during the week, so that our Shabbos doesn't turn into a regular Sunday afternoon. We have extra time. We're not working today, so let's move all the stuff in the garage around. Let's reorganize the living room. We shouldn't just take Shabbos as a day off to kind of just be busy with work, catching up on all our housework, so to speak. So Chazal asked us from moving around various kelim. That's reason number one. The Rambam says why we cannot move certain kelim on Shabbos. In the next halacha Yud Gimel, the Rambam adds another two reasons. He says, "V'od kishiyivaker v'yitaltel kelim shamachtel lehiser." When a person wakes up in the morning on Shabbos and will start moving around kelim that are malachtel lehiser, meant to do prohibited actions, efshir sheis asik behen ma'at v'yodei malacha. So you'll pick up your pen. The pen technically, Minat Torah, there's no issue for me to hold my pen on Shabbos. The only thing I can't do is write. But if I'm going to be able to clean up my dresser Shabbos morning and put my pens away, put my hammer away, I might come to, see that nail's a little bit out of place. I'll knock it into place. So then I did. I'm chayav on baina on Shabbos. I was building on Shabbos. I forgot something. I want to write it down. So the second reason the Rambam says we have to ask kelim shemalachtem le'iser is simply for the reason if we're going to allow you to pick it up and move it around like you do during the week, you're going to come to use it and be machal Shabbos daraisa. And number three, the Rambam says, is that there are many people that even during the week they're either unemployed or they're retired or they're in between jobs or whatever the reason is. They don't really have so much work during the week, so the whole week they're sitting around and not doing much. So if we're going to allow them to just on Shabbos to do anything they want the same way they do during the week, we won't be able to tell a difference between Shabbos and Wednesday. So therefore we have to be more prohibitive, we have to be more restrictive to them on Shabbos and tell them the certain things you can't do in order to make a distinction between Wednesday and Shabbos, right? So we have to. So again, 3 reasons Rambam is saying why Muktzeh came into be. Number 1 is that because just like we have an idea from the Psukim in Yirmiyah that we can't walk on Shabbos in the same way we can't run on Shabbos like we run during the week unless we're going to a mitzvah, and we don't have weekday conversation the same way we have during the week in order to make that distinction. So here's another idea that Chachamim put forth, similar in that same idea, that we can't just move any kelim we want. Number 2, the Rambam said, is that we should not come to do the malacha. And number 3 is because some people are not working at all during the week, and we have to draw a distinction between a regular weekday for them and Shabbos. Okay, seems like all nice reasons. The problem is that although the Rambam is giving these great reasons, we can all relate to them on some level, he's not coming from any specific Gemara. The Gemara doesn't say these reasons. In fact, the Ravid over here on the side points out that the Gemara later on in Shabbos, I didn't copy the Gemara, but the Gemara on Kuf Chav Dalid seems to imply the reason why Chazal asked Muktzeh was because of Haitzah. We're afraid that if you're going to come to pick up your pen on Shabbos, you're going to come to walk out with it. The same way I walk out with my pen in my pocket on a regular weekday, I'm going to come to walk out with it on Shabbos. So Chazal don't want us. Haitzah is an Isser D'Oraisa, one of the 39 Malachas, the last of the 39 Malachas. So the Gemara seems to say the reason why they asked her tiltul was because of Haitzah. So the Ravid says the Rambam missed the main reason, and this is really a question many of the Mefarshim deal with, why the Rambam gives 3 of his own nice reasons to why to ask for Muktzeh and leaves out the reason which the Gemara seems to say that the whole reason why Muktzeh came to be is because of tiltul, of Haitzah, that you're going to come to carry it out from one domain to another domain. So there are many answers to this question on the Rambam. I'll just speak out some of them for a moment. The Magen Mishnah on the side of the Rambam offers 2 suggestions. One of them is that it's true that Chazal, Nehemiah particularly, originally might have asered tiltul Muktzeh because of Haitzah, but he pulled back a little bit on the Muktzeh. As we saw in the Gemara, he first asered Ol Kalim, and then he let go, so to speak, of the severity of the Isser. So even though he let go of the severity of the Isser, the Rambam is suggesting other reasons why we still have Muktzeh in force today. Why do we have any of the categories of Muktzeh that we have today? Why don't they say, okay, everything should go back to seemingly the way it was when the Torah was given? Seemingly when the Torah was given, the whole idea of Muktzeh there was no problem. I couldn't move any rocks on Shabbos, I could move any wood I want, I could move any dead body I want, I could move any pens or anything else like that I want also. Seemingly from the Torah, all of that was permissible. So the Rambam is now suggesting, says the Magen Mishnah, all these other reasons why Chazal still left Muktzeh in place to make Shabbos be distinct from the rest of the week and to be a safeguard. That's one of the reasons the Rambam said that we should not come to do any particular malacha. There's an interesting tshuva from the Shalom Meshiv. The Shalom Meshiv lived in the late 1800s. He wrote many, many long tshuvas. And he has there a tshuva now, just one more thing. The Shalom Meshiv has, I think, 4 halakim of tshuvas. I think maybe 4 or 5 halakim of tshuvas. Each one of them, within them, are various maduras. So we'll have, let's say, in Chelik Aleph, it's really 4 in 1. So when you break it up, each volume really has 4 volumes in it. So and each tshuva is a couple pages long. Anyway, they're very, very long. And in the tshuva, he has discussing Carmelis, how we work at a Carmelis on Shabbos. So he writes, he's bothered by a very strong question. He says, how could it be, I didn't copy it in the book, I'll read it out to you. He says, it's very small print and it's very long tshuva. This is only 1 page of a 5-page tshuva. So the Shalom Meshiv writes, why is it that if you said, like the Gemara says, like the Ravid pointed out, that Muktzeh is also outside Saw, if you go back to the Psukim and Nehemiah, the Psukim and Nehemiah very clearly say that Nehemiah closed up the gates of Yerushalayim and sealed it off on Shabbos. So he says, and he has a Gemara on Erevin and Daf Kuf, which explains that Yerushalayim, at that point, they rebuilt the walls of Shusha Yachid. It was a private domain. You were allowed to carry. It was a built-in Erev. So what you can't tell me that the reason that Nehemiah was asking Muktzeh because he saw the Hilchos Shabbos Yerushalayim was because of Haitzah. There couldn't have been Haitzah going on in Yerushalayim per se. Okay, bring it in. But once they're in, you don't see Haitzah on Shabbos. So when do they come in? Before Shabbos, after Shabbos? So he suggests that that's why the Rambam wants to give all the other reasons, because in order to keep it for Doros, it's true Haitzah might be a problem, but Haitzah is not always a problem for Muktzeh, because we're Zochet to live here, we have Ne'er, so we don't experience the prohibition of Haitzah on a regular Shabbos in most cases, unless you're really walking far out on Shabbos, right? So in order to make it that Muktzeh is applicable in all areas, or wherever Jews are living, and no matter what setting they are, so Rambam offered all his suggestions for Muktzeh in order that Muktzeh will be more universal for wherever a situation we might be. And it's probable to say, the Shalom Esha want to say, that even in the days of Nehemiah, these reasons had to exist, even though the Gemara doesn't say them, because in Yerushalayim itself, it was seemingly a Rosh Hashanah. Okay, but what I really want to speak out now is this Aruch HaShulchan, which is on page 4, number 8. The Aruch HaShulchan really has an interesting approach here, which I think really is going to change the whole concept of Muktzeh. And it makes a lot of sense, but at the same time, it's hard to exactly pinpoint what his source is. The Aruch HaShulchan prefaces this idea that we have a word that we use commonly in Gemara for Hilchos Shabbos called a shvus. A shvus, which is of course related to the word Shabbos. The word shvus means that it's a certain decrees that Chazal put into place that help us with our rest on Shabbos. There are certain safeguards that Chazal put in, Leman Yishbos, in order that we can keep Shabbos probably as a day of rest. So Chazal instituted many shvusim. So he says there's many different categories of shvusim, and he writes, I'm just paraphrasing from paragraph Dal and Hey, he says, towards the end of Dal, about halfway through, he says, Ubishas ma'an Torah, already at the time of the giving of the Torah, Siva lanu Moshe Rabbeinu l'chol shvusei Shabbos. Moshe Rabbeinu already dictated to us at Har Sinai, in the Midbar, all the various shvusim, Api Hashem. V'atorah kolon, the Torah includes them, B'lashon Tishbos. The Torah says on Shabbos we should rest. To below hashvusim, ein kan shvisa klal. If we don't have these takanas of shvusim, of how to rest, then we won't have a day of rest at all. Shabbos will just look like any other day of the week. It's true we have 39 malachos, which are da'araisa, and the Gemara explains to us how we learned them out from the Mishkan, but all the other side parts of Shabbos, if we would not have them in force, Shabbos would almost look like a regular day. So big deal we don't plow. A lot of times on a regular Tuesday I don't plow either, right? But by putting Muktzeh and other Drabanan into effect, that really gives Shabbos its essence and really gives Shabbos the day that we can see it as different from any other day. He says, even though these shvusim don't come into the number of 39 malachos, and you're not chayiv death on them, nonetheless, he says, they are given from Moshe Rabbeinu, so they are part of our Mesorah from Torah Sheba'al Peh. Already in the Midbar, they were in effect. So not that although Hilchos Muktzeh might not be in the Torah, says the Aruch HaShulchan, nonetheless, we shouldn't think that we would go back 3,000 plus years and go back to the desert and see a Klal Yisrael accepted Shabbos then and kept Shabbos then. It shouldn't look that different than we do it today. Can't say it's exactly the same, but it should basically look similar to the way we have it today. And Muktzeh was already in force from the onset. So how do you categorize? Okay, that's the discussion itself. It's true. It's still not the Araisa. It's a right within the Rabbanon. There's different levels. No, because we discussed once in a Shiur on Torah Sheba'al Peh, that whole transmission, how it works, that you can have something which is a high level to Rabbanon, but even though it could be sourced back to somewhere from the Midbar, it was already taught from Sinai.
So you'd say it's an ismachta?
No, I'm not going to use the word. I'm going to call it a shvus, like the Gemara calls it. Moshe Rabbeinu taught it to us. Well, it's a unique. It's somewhere. It's teetering in between a D'Rabbanan and a D'Oraisa. It's D'Rabbanan in the fact that it's not in the Torah and it's not learned out from a specific pasuk in the Torah, so we can't pinpoint it to a specific source and say, well, it's that pasuk, and you transgress that pasuk, we'll give you Malchus, or we'll give you or Chayv Skila. But at the same time, we date it back all the way to Moshe Rabbeinu in the fact that it's a shvus, it's chamor. It's more chamor than a regular D'Rabbanan that only came about in that which we can say clear came about in times of the Gemara.
So
and he says
after the portable Mishkan.
Well, at the time that Klal Yisrael was taught Shabbos, which was in Mara, and then they continued to learn Shabbos throughout the desert. At Har Sinai, they were camped there for almost a year, and then throughout they got all the halachos of Moshe Rabbeinu. Muktzeh was already in force. So what happened in the days of Nehemiah? What happened? The Gemara seemed to have told us in the beginning that in the days of Nehemiah, all of a sudden Muktzeh was born. So Shulchan continues and says in the middle of Hay, A couple lines down to paragraph Hey, he says, "Elo elu ach b'nemei Nechemia ben Chakalia shayu prutzim b'chil Shabbosos." There was a great breach in Chil Shabbos me'azman shayu b'Bavel, from the time that Klal Yisrael spent, after they were exiled from the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash. Klal Yisrael was in Bavel, and seemingly the nation was on a down in a spiritual sense, being witness to the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. Amad hu, so Nehemiah got up for Ezra, and with his Ezra, v'Chagai, Zechariah Malach, with the Nevi'im, v'Anshei Knesset Hakdol, v'Gazru, and then they made a specific takana al Doram for their generation, od chumros, extra stringencies in Hilchos Shabbos, like we saw in the Gemara before. They only allowed 3 kelim. Those these are not gezeras that were everlasting for generations. Like we said before in Taisvis, he says afterwards, and then once Nehemiah and that generation saw that they were now being able to keep Shabbos properly, so he pulled back and went back to the way Muktzeh always was. So this is different. We said before from the Shulchan Aruch Harav that perhaps the difference in what Nehemiah did was kelim, and the days of David HaMelech was already Muktzeh Machmas Gufo. The way the Aruch HaShulchan is learning is no. Everything existed from beginning, from way back when. Zachar Shem Shabbos L'Katcher, we got the 4th commandment. Already then, we had everything in force, already with all Hilchos Shabbos, already with all Hilchos Muktzeh, all the categories of Muktzeh. What happened is that they came back from Bavel. The nation was on a spiritual low. Hilchos Shabbos was rampant. People were not interested. Whatever the case was, the decline of the spiritual existence of Klal Yisrael was about to totally, they were going to lose everything. Nehemiah gets up and says, we need now to make a radical transformation in this, and we have to do now a strong takana. So he says, he goes beyond the limit, so to speak, and says everything is usher, almost. 95% of your kelim in your house are going to be usher. So now it's like the Rambam speaks about Hilchos Deis, and the Pirush Mishnah speaks about if a person wants to train himself in midos, right? A person wants to become, ish chesed, or is working on kas. So we have to go to an extreme sometimes in one midah in order to find the balance. The derech hamutza, of course, the middle of the road is always the best way to travel. But sometimes in order to get to the middle of the road, a person has to go to one extreme and then figure out how to balance himself out to get to the appropriate mahalach. So too, this is what the Aruch HaShulchan is learning in Hilchos Muktzeh. Muktzeh was in force before Nehemiah, before David HaMelech. It was in force from the beginning. What happened in the days of Nehemiah was only that Klal Yisrael was too much of an extreme of Chil Shabbos, so they went to the extreme until they were able to pull back and come to the level of Muktzeh like we have it today. I want to just end off with
what part was the extreme?
The extreme is that they were everything, even more kelim were also only things that were basically, to oversimplify, only things which were needed exactly for eating or food preparation was allowed to be used on Shabbos. Any other kelim were not allowed to be moved on Shabbos at all in the days of Nehemiah for that time period, until people became cognizant of the fact that Chil Shabbos was something severe, and then they were able to go back to the way we have it today. So basically, again, the bottom line, according to Aruch HaShulchan, the way we keep Hilchos Muktzeh today is the way they kept it 3,500 years ago in the desert as well. What happened was, after the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash, when Klal Yisrael went into Bavel, there was such a decrease in keeping Shabbos properly, so that at that point, for some select, isolated period of time, Nehemiah and his Bezdin had to make this takana in order to strengthen people in Hilchos Shabbos. And once that was accomplished, we went back to the way it always was. But again, if we go back to that Gemara in the beginning, the Gemara at face value doesn't seem to say that. The Gemara seems to say is that Nehemiah invented Muktzeh, because the Gemara never says what the Aruch HaShulchan is saying. But the Aruch HaShulchan is suggesting it based on the way he learns Rambam in a previous Rambam, Perek Chafal. That's why the Rambam understands Shavuos in general, that all Shavuosim were in force from the beginning, from the onset of Hilchos Shabbos, and just they weren't as severe in the fact that they're not Chayiv Misa. Okay, let's go to the next source for a minute, then I'll say something else. The Beis Yosef, at the end of Hilchos Muktzeh in Siman Shin Ches, brings a fascinating Yerushalmi where it's underlined. He's discussing here of what's called in Chazal a kadur. In modern Hebrew, kadur is translated as a ball. Kadur regel, or soccer, or football, right? But a kadur, the poskim say, is muktzah on Shabbos. Now, they're discussing not what we have today, necessarily. They're discussing some type of keli. It was used for playing, just type of sport, but it was fashioned in some way. It's not clear to me exactly. It was some type of leather material, with stuffing, and it was a problem of it coming apart on Shabbos. There was all types of problems with it, and it was muktzah according to many poskim. Machlekes ha-poskim. But the Beis Yosef here quotes to Yerushalmi. Umiyu b'Yushalmi Perek Beis the tiniest matzasi. He brings the Yerushalmi in the second parak of Tainus, which says, Tur Shimon, a city called Tur Shimon, Lamachar. Why was it destroyed? I think it's in the times of the second base of English, I think. Yesh Ayim Pnei Haznus. Some people say because they were unfortunately transgressing Znus, they were not having appropriate moral behavior. The Yesh Ayim Shoyim Mesachkin Bekadur. So it's a machlokes, two opinions. The reason why the city was destroyed was either because of immoral behavior. For that, perhaps we can understand why the city might be suitable for being destroyed. But the second reason the Yerushalmi is suggesting is because it was destroyed because they were transgressing the Isser of playing ball on Shabbos. Says the K'tzais HaShulchan. The K'tzais HaShulchan is Reb Chaim Noah. Chaim Noah was a great Paisik, a very interesting personality. He was born in Eretz Yisrael as a Talmud in the beginning of his life with the Stei Chemed. Came from a Chabad family, but at one point in his career he went out to Bukhara in Russia. He was a Rav of the Sfarim for a couple of years till he returned to Eretz Yisrael, and he wrote many Sfarim about the Shiur and various to figure out how the various Shiur of the Torah, the Revius and the Tefach and the Amma, and one of his Sfarim is called the K'tzais HaShulchan. It's about 10 volumes on areas of halacha, and he brings this Beis Yosef and he prefaces by saying, first of all, there's a Medrash that says the same thing, and the Medrash says further, this city of Tur Shimon wasn't just a city of Avar Yonim. He says they were a city that was very careful in Hilchos Shabbos. He brings that they were a city that every week they would bring out Gimel Me'os Kefifiyos Shal Petite Lechem Aniyim. They would bring forth 300 baskets full of food baskets for Tomchei Shabbos every week. They were very into Kiyum Shabbos. The Chazal here are not telling us that they transgressed the 39 Malachas. They didn't transgress. They just had a problem that they couldn't get over the fact that they wanted to play their ball on Shabbos. He says, but you see how severe the Isser of Muktzeh is, that Chazal are being Magal to us according to one man Diyama. That's why it was suitable for them to be destroyed, unfortunately. Just because of this, so to speak, minor transgression of an Isser D'Rabbanan, or a Shvus, we should call it, based on the Aruch Shulchan explained it. He just points out from here that we see, although Muktzeh is not seemingly categorized as severe in the Torah, or it's not in the Torah at all, as the 39 Malachas, which are Chayav, Skila, and Bezin, nonetheless, the Medrash and the Yerushalmi here are telling us that this was a reason for a city which was otherwise fully Shomer Shabbos. Doesn't say that they were transgressing anything else. It's the only thing that they were doing. And again, he says the Medrash says they excelled in helping other people have food for Shabbos, but nonetheless, the fact that they were lax in Hilchos Muktzeh was a reason that they would suffer.
What was the Isser?
So it's Isser is some level of Muktzeh. So he discusses according. It was Muktzeh, because seemingly either because it somehow came apart and we were afraid we were massacring it on Shabbos, or because it's just a zilzal in general, meaning using Muktzeh here is what I want to get to. We're using, according to one man Diyamar, the way Chaim is speaking out, if you hold Kador as mutter on Shabbos, so how can you understand this Gemara? Right, again, we said there's a machlokes rishonim if it's mutter also on Shabbos, this ball, if it's mutter also. If you hold that it's mutter, so how you can understand this Yerushalmi? Why is Yerushalmi saying that the city is being destroyed? So he says, I'll get the words I'm looking for. Kafilu amatirin. The whole point of Shabbos and for us is that we should have now the time to study Torah. The rest of the week we're busy. So people were busy occupying themselves in sport on Shabbos. By taking away from the Shavuos, from keeping Shabbos the way it was supposed to be, a day of rest. Rest meaning we should now be focused on spirituality, on learning and doing Torah and Avodah. That was the reason for the Hilchos Shabbos. I want to go back. We asked in the beginning a question of why is it that we colloquially use the term Muktzeh on Shabbos. Everything, if you don't do it, it's Muktzeh. Because I think the way Chazal are being magal to us, the idea of Muktzeh, especially when the Aruch Shulchan brings it up, it's the whole idea of a Shavuos, and that it was always into place. It's really keeping Shabbos in the spirit of Shabbos in a way that's the most common way we're going to keep Shabbos, is by keeping the Hilchos Muktzeh. Because again, many of the malachas is very easy for us to avoid on Shabbos. We don't usually work in the field, even if you are a farmer. You don't necessarily work in the field every day of the week. And all the other various malachas, it's easy for us to avoid them. So we don't necessarily see the kiyum of Shabbos bepoil in a coming to fruition only through the hilchos of Muktzeh. The Muktzeh is really what's making it different from Shabbos, from a regular weekday. So it could be that's why Muktzeh is the term we typically use, and the way the K'tzas HaShulchan is really speaking it out is that it's so chamor, this idea to keep the Kedusha Shabbos at its proper level, and that's how we can even see, unfortunately, that in times of the Churban, that a whole city was destroyed to the fact that this laxity of Hilchos Muktzeh. We should be Zeicha, that we should be able to Mishayim Shabbos properly. And the Gemara says, as the Farish song as well, one more Shabbos, and we should all be Zeicha to the Gula Shleim Meher B'Yameinu.
Amen.
I think part of the problem with the Kador, some hold it's not a Kli.
Just turn this off.